I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into the hall that morning. You can sense when a room doesn't want you in it. You can feel it in the air, the stiffness, the sideways glances, the silence that feels rehearsed. And that's exactly how my son's wedding felt. A day that should have been warm and full of laughter felt like I had walked into a place where a decision had already been made about me, and no one planned to tell me what it was. I tried to calm myself. I told my heart to stop racing and just be happy for Daniel. It was his big day, after all, a simple ceremony, he said, small, intimate, nothing flashy. He made it sound like they wanted to save money, and I respected that. I even admired it. I'd raised him to value things that couldn't be bought, but as I looked around that hall, at the modest decorations and the strangely trimmed guest list, a thought crept in, one I tried to brush away. Why does this feel like a performance instead of a celebration? The first crack in the day came when my sister barely met my eyes as she hugged me. She looked nervous, tense, like she was hiding something behind her smile. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she had wedding jitters or was overwhelmed, but then my cousin avoided me too. Then my niece. Everyone who usually spoke to me first seemed suddenly preoccupied with anything but acknowledging me. And it wasn't just me imagining things, I've lived long enough to know when love turns cold. But the real blow came minutes before the ceremony. I was walking down the narrow hallway behind the stage, looking for a place to sit, when I heard voices, hushed, sharp, intimate. I stopped. It was my son's fiancée, no soon-to-be wife, and one of her bridesmaids. They were just around the corner. I recognized her voice instantly, sweet on the outside, but always laced with something harder underneath, something calculating, and then I heard her whisper it. She has no idea what's coming. My heart slammed against my chest. The way she said it, not nervous, not overwhelmed, but triumphant, like she was announcing the final move in a game she'd already won, and I absolutely knew. She meant me. I froze in place. My breath caught, and in that moment, the whole world seemed to tilt. What didn't I know? What were they planning? Why did she sound victorious on her wedding day? A mother shouldn't have to fear the woman marrying her son, but that's exactly what washed over me. Fear. Thick, unsteady, choking fear. Before I could gather myself, the music started, and I had no choice but to take my seat among people who couldn't look me in the eye. Daniel walked down the aisle moments later, and when he glanced at me, there was no warmth, no excitement, just a guarded expression, like he was bracing himself for something I hadn't yet been allowed to know. I smiled anyway. A mother's instinct is to push pain down and pretend everything is normal, even when the world is splitting apart inside you. But as I watched him exchange vows, as I watched his new wife grip his hands with that same triumphant smile, I couldn't shake the echo of her whisper. She has no idea what's coming. What was coming? The ceremony ended quickly, too quickly, and instead of being surrounded by family the way weddings usually go, people scattered. No big photos. No extended greetings. No joy. It felt like a movie scene where everyone walks off the set the moment the director yells cut. I was gathering my purse when one of her cousins approached me, not to congratulate me, not even to make small talk. She simply said, in a tone that could have cut glass, "They're ready for you now." Ready. For me. She led me to a car outside. I wasn't asked if I wanted to go. I wasn't told where we were headed. I was escorted like a guest who didn't trust herself to behave. I remember sitting in the back seat, staring out the window, feeling like I had been dragged into a trap I couldn't yet see the shape of. When we stopped, my stomach turned. We weren't at a restaurant, or a hall, or a family home. We were at my home, my luxury property, the house I bought after decades of scraping, saving, and sacrificing, the place I'd poured my soul into, the place Daniel had always admired, always said he wanted to raise his own children in someday, and there she was, the bride, standing in front of my home like she was stepping onto a stage. She now controlled. She didn't wait for me to walk up. She didn't greet me. She didn't thank me for anything. She simply turned to her new husband and said, loud enough for everyone standing outside to hear, "Finally, ours. Ours, not yours, not mine, but ours." My body went cold, because that one word, that one tiny word, ripped the day apart and showed me the truth beneath it. This wasn't a celebration. This wasn't a wedding. This was a transition, a shift in ownership, a step in a much larger plan. And every single person who had avoided my eyes at the ceremony knew. They all knew. They weren't avoiding me because they were busy. They were avoiding me because they were guilty. I stood there on the driveway, frozen, while they took group photos I wasn't invited into. I watched them wander through my home, laughing, exploring, touching things like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Someone popped champagne in my kitchen. Someone else opened my bedroom door like they were inspecting a future possession. No one said a word to me. Not even Daniel. And I kept wondering, what kind of son stands in his mother's home on his wedding night and lets people treat her like a stranger? What kind of child looks at his own parent as if she's in the way? But what happened next cut even deeper. As I walked into the living room, still dazed, still trying to make sense of anything, I heard her voice again, soft this time, but unmistakable. She'll figure it out soon, but it won't matter by then. I turned toward her, and she didn't even flinch. She just smiled at me, a slow, knowing smile, the kind that says, I won, and you don't even know what game you lost. My legs felt weak. My head felt light. And for the first time in years, I felt truly outnumbered in my own home. Everywhere I turned that night, her relatives whispered. My relatives looked away. And Daniel, he kept his distance. Like touching me might reveal something he didn't want exposed. The night blurred into uneasy conversations, sudden silences, and laughter that wasn't meant for me. I remember standing in my own kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to breathe normally while the walls around me felt like they were closing in. Have you ever felt like a stranger in the very place you built with your own hands? Have you ever looked at your child and realized there was something dark in his eyes, something you never placed there? That was me, on the night of my son's wedding, surrounded by people who seemed to be celebrating a victory I didn't understand. But the universe has a cruel way of giving answers. Hours later, after everyone finally left, I walked into the downstairs office to get my scarf. I just wanted to go upstairs, shut my bedroom door, and pretend the day hadn't happened. But when I switched on the little desk lamp, I noticed something on the floor. A phone. A woman's phone? One of hers. It had a message on the screen. A message she must have dropped a device before seeing it first. I only glanced at it, and then the sender name froze me, because it was someone I knew. Someone close to me. Someone who should have been loyal. The message said, "Is everything in place for the transfer now that the wedding is done?" And the reply, presumably written earlier, was even worse. Yes, she won't suspect anything. Her signature is ready. Her signature. Mine. My throat closed. My knees buckled. And for a moment, I felt like the entire world was collapsing under me. But somehow, I steadied myself long enough to pick up the phone and read the rest. And what I read next, what I saw in that conversation, what I realized in that moment, it changed everything I believed about family. Because hidden in those messages was the first, undeniable proof that my own blood, the people I had loved, supported, and sacrificed for, had been planning something behind my back. Not for weeks, not for months, but for years. And that night, standing alone in the dim light of my own office, holding a phone that wasn't supposed to fall into my hands, I understood one thing with chilling clarity. They weren't trying to build a new life. They were trying to take mine. And what I discovered on that phone was only the beginning, because later that night, I found something even worse, the very first message that proved my family had been plotting against me far longer than I ever imagined. I used to believe that loyalty was something you could build, brick by brick, through sacrifice. I used to think that if you poured enough love, enough money, enough patience into someone, they would eventually see you as their foundation, their protector, their safe place. But I learned slowly, painfully, that people can grow to resent the very hand that keeps them from drowning. I didn't know that then. All I knew was that I would do anything for my son, and for anyone he loved. Even if it meant cutting pieces out of my own future. Even if it meant pretending I wasn't exhausted. Even if it meant ignoring the small, sharp warnings that something wasn't right. The truth is, I built everyone else's safety net while tearing holes in my own. And I didn't see the trap until it began to close around me. For years, Daniel depended on me in ways that felt normal at the time. Rent came due. I covered it. Tuition too high. I found a way. Business failed again. I emptied another account, convinced that this time he'd learn, this time he'd find his footing. I wanted him to feel capable, even if it meant I became the one quietly falling apart.
And whenever his wife, sweet-smiled, soft-voiced, polite to a fault, thanked me for helping their little family, I felt warm inside. Needed. Appreciated. But replaying it now, I understand her politeness wasn't gratitude. It was strategy. There is a kind of smile that can hide 1,000 sharpened edges, and I had mistaken every one of hers for kindness. When I think back to all the choices I made, I feel something cold crawl up my spine. The time I loaned them the down payment for their first apartment, only to find out later they used half of it on a vacation I wasn't supposed to know about. The year Daniel called me, voice shaking, terrified because he'd fallen behind on his student loan payments. I didn't hesitate. I drove 2 hours in the rain to sign as a guarantor, and then paid the remaining balance when he defaulted. I told myself, it's fine, he'll do better next time. But every next time looked exactly the same. Another ask, another crisis, another subtle way of making his emergencies my responsibility. But what happened next left me truly uneasy, because it didn't come from Daniel directly. It came from the world around him, whispering things I wasn't meant to hear. My sister, who had always been open with me, started acting strangely. Every time I mentioned Daniel or his wife, her eyes darted away. She'd change the subject, fidget with her hands, or suddenly remember a chore she had to finish. At first I thought maybe I'd overwhelmed her with my worries, or maybe she was just tired. But there was one moment that stuck in my mind like a thorn. I had casually asked, "Did Daniel say anything to you about needing help with rent again?" And she froze. Absolutely froze. Before forcing a smile so stiff it made my stomach turn. I don't know anything about that," she said. Too quickly. Too practiced. That was the first flicker of doubt. The first moment I wondered if there were conversations happening behind my back. Conversations about me. Conversations that I wouldn't have liked. Soon after, something else happened. Something small, but sharp enough to leave a mark. I received a notification for a bank withdrawal I didn't remember authorizing. It wasn't large enough to sound alarms, just a few $100s, but something about it felt wrong. I stared at the transaction, the timestamp, the branch location, and while nothing screamed fraud, something whispered, "Pay attention." I later brought it up to Daniel, gently, almost apologetically. "Did you happen to use my card for something? I got a notification and I can't place it." He didn't even look up from his phone. "Don't ask questions, Mom. It's handled." Those 4 words cut deeper than I expected. I remember blinking at him, trying to process what he'd just said. It wasn't just rude, it was dismissive, almost irritated, as if my wanting to understand what was happening with my own money was some kind of inconvenience. I swallowed my confusion and nodded, pretending his tone didn't sting. But inside me, a quiet alarm turned on. Still, I kept helping him. I told myself it was just stress, that young couples go through rough patches, that he didn't mean it. That's what parents do, right? We justify. We explain away the things that hurt us. But then came the envelope, small, cream-colored, tucked between bills on my counter. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I recognized the words written across the front. "To the future, Mrs." I stared at it for almost a full minute, confused. Future Mrs.? Daniel was already married. Who was this addressed to? Curiosity clawed at me, but I didn't open it. It felt too personal, too intentional, like something slipped where it didn't belong. I asked my daughter-in-law about it the next time I saw her. She laughed, too quickly, too brightly, and said it must have been a silly mix-up at the bridal shop. You know how chaotic wedding vendors are. She waved a perfectly manicured hand, but the way her eyes darted away told me she was lying. And suddenly, I remembered how she had insisted on using my address for certain deliveries just to keep things organized. Organized for what? My intuition whispered things I didn't want to hear. That envelope wasn't meant for me. It wasn't a mistake. It was a breadcrumb, and I should have followed it immediately. But I didn't. I trusted her smile again, even though it was starting to look less like sweetness and more like a mask. The more I began to reflect, the more a new truth, an ugly one, began to surface. People weren't just depending on me, They were resenting me for it. There were offhand comments I used to shrug off. "You always have it figured out, don't you? Must be nice being the one with answers. Some of us don't have a safety net like you do." I never understood the bitterness behind those words. Bitterness so fine it almost sounded like a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was a lawyer specializing in property transfers and asset division. The subject line read, Title consolidation from marital property. My breath caught in my throat. Marital property? I wasn't married. I wasn't consolidating anything. I opened the email slowly, as if the text might bite me. Inside was a long chain of messages referencing an unnamed couple, the clients, who were preparing paperwork for an upcoming transition. The lawyer discussed deadlines, signatures, necessary documents, and confidentiality clauses. And attached at the bottom was a scanned document, my property, my luxury property, listed as marital asset pending transfer. The house I bought after 40 years of breaking my back. The house I dreamed of retiring in. The house that symbolized every sacrifice I had ever made. Listed as theirs. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. Without my signature. I felt something inside me wilt, like a flower crushed slowly underfoot. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It felt like the room tilted sideways, like the world I knew was slipping out of my hands, and I was too stunned to grab onto anything. And just when I thought the shock had reached its peak, I noticed something else. An email from my daughter-in-law replying directly to the attorney. Not Daniel. Her. In her perfect, polite tone, she wrote, "We will ensure she signs the documents after the ceremony." After the ceremony. Ceremony? What ceremony? Why was anything involving my property connected to a ceremony? Confusion twisted into dread. My fingers trembled as I clicked deeper into the thread, scrolling through messages I was never meant to see. She mentioned timelines, contingencies, inheritance strategy, and one chilling sentence that made my stomach lurch. She believes it's just a routine update. We just need to keep her calm. Keep me calm. The words pulsed in my head, threatening to split me open. My daughter-in-law, the woman who smiled at me, hugged me, called me mom, was discussing ways to manipulate me into signing something I didn't understand. And Daniel, my own son, was copied on every email. He didn't object, he didn't question, he didn't protect me. He participated. But as devastating as that was, it wasn't the moment everything shattered. That came later. It started with a phone call. A quiet, ordinary thing, something I would have ignored if my intuition hadn't already been screaming. Daniel was in the living room that evening, pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear. He spoke in a tone I had never heard from him. Low, tense, urgent. His back was to me as he whispered, "No, she doesn't know. She won't find out. Just stick to the plan." Plan. That word hit me like ice water. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but he wasn't exactly being careful. I stepped forward, and the moment my foot touched the hallway tile, he turned. His eyes widened. He hung up immediately. "Who was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just work," he said. But the lie was too clean, too quick, too rehearsed. I knew then, without doubt, that he was involved in something he didn't want me to know, something that included me. And when he left that evening, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the spot where he had stood, wondering where I went wrong, wondering how long he had been lying to me, wondering what else he had planned. But the real storm hit when I found the refinancing form. I wasn't searching for anything at that moment. I was simply cleaning the kitchen table, sorting through papers Daniel had left behind during his visit. And there it was, a sleek packet of documents, folded neatly, almost casually, as if it didn't contain a nuclear bomb. At the top were the words, refinancing authorization. Underneath was my name, my address, my personal information, and at the bottom, my signature, my handwriting. Almost. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't exact, but it was close enough to fool a bank clerk who wasn't paying attention. Someone had practiced my signature. Someone had forged me. Someone had already filed the paperwork. My hands went ice cold. A buzzing sound filled my ears. Fear crawled up my spine like a living thing. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That wasn't an accident. That was a crime, a deliberate attempt to claim something that didn't belong to them. But even then, even with mounting evidence, I still told myself maybe Daniel didn't fully understand what he was doing. Maybe he was being pressured, manipulated, forced. Until the night of the secret meeting. I wasn't supposed to overhear anything. I wasn't supposed to be nearby, but fate has a way of revealing truth at the worst possible moment. Daniel and his wife thought they had left the house, but they had simply stepped into the backyard, their voices drifting through the cracked window above the sink. I froze when I heard her. And when the judge called my name, the entire room froze. The first morning after the courtroom verdict felt surreal, as if the world itself had shifted just enough for me to breathe again. I walked through the front doors of my luxury home, and the silence was almost intoxicating, a quiet I hadn't allowed myself to enjoy in years. Every hallway, every polished surface, every room that had once been tainted by the thought of their intrusion now felt like a reclamation of my life. I ran my hands over the dining table, once the site of whispered betrayals and cold glances, and felt a strange warmth, a recognition that this space belonged entirely to me. The house was more than bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of endurance, a testament to decades of sacrifice and unwavering love for a family that had, for a time, forgotten what family really meant. Yet, even as I moved through each room, a small pang of sorrow lingered. Sorrow for the innocence that had been lost, for the trust that had been shattered, for the years spent believing love and loyalty were guarantees rather than choices. But that sorrow was tempered by a burgeoning sense of hope, a spark that whispered that I was no longer bound by their greed or manipulation, that I could finally choose who I allowed into my life. Cutting ties with those who had chosen greed over blood was not easy, but it was necessary. I called family members one by one, setting firm boundaries, explaining that, while love could not be commanded, respect could not be ignored. Some hung up mid-conversation, others offered weak apologies that I acknowledged with quiet grace. The hardest part was Daniel. How do you sever the emotional umbilical cord from a child you carried for 9 months, raised, and sacrificed for without regret? The answer, I realized, was to recognize that love without accountability was dangerous, and forgiveness without justice was hollow. I began to distance myself from toxic ties, creating space not just for healing, but for clarity. And slowly a sense of peace settled over me like a soft, protective blanket. I allowed myself to grieve the lost versions of my family, to mourn the betrayal, to acknowledge the shame and anger, but I refused to let it define me. Every day became an exercise in reclaiming self-respect, in choosing serenity over resentment, and redefining what family meant in my life. What would you do if your own child tried to take your home, your legacy, your sense of self? I had lived it, and I chose to reclaim my power rather than dwell in their treachery. In the weeks that followed, I renovated the house, not out of vanity, but as a symbolic act of renewal. I stripped away the memories they had tried to impose, the small marks of their intrusion, repainting walls, polishing surfaces, reimagining spaces to reflect the life I wanted to lead. Each brushstroke, each placement of furniture became a ritual of empowerment, a subtle reminder that I was the architect of my present and future. Friends and distant relatives, those who had quietly supported me through the ordeal, began visiting more often. Their presence was grounding, reminding me that family could be chosen as much as it could be given by blood, that loyalty and care could flourish outside the bounds of betrayal. And then, unexpectedly, life offered small but profound affirmations. A stranger approached me at a gallery opening months later, recognizing me from the court coverage, saying, "Thank you for standing up. You reminded me I don't have to be a victim either." Their words resonated deeply, a testament to the ripple effect of courage, a reminder that even in the wake of betrayal, one's actions could inspire and heal far beyond one's own walls. Months passed, and then a letter arrived from Daniel, written in careful, tentative handwriting. His words were not what I had hoped for, nor did they attempt to erase the past, but they were an acknowledgement of fault, a fragile offering of regret. He wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you can see that I understand what I've done." I held the letter in my hands, feeling the weight of years of hurt and betrayal, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel both sorrow and relief. It was a closure of sorts, not complete redemption, but a recognition that honesty, even belated, could exist. I folded the letter carefully and set it aside, a reminder that healing was not about erasing the past, but integrating it into a stronger sense of self. I realized that legacy wasn't a house, or money, or even public acknowledgement. Legacy was the integrity I maintained when faced with deceit, the boundaries I enforced when confronted with manipulation, the dignity I refused to surrender even when betrayed by those I loved most.